When Malcolm Carter parked his 15-year-old pickup truck against the curb on Whitlock Lane on the morning of March 14th, the engine ticked in the cold for a long moment before he turned it off. The street smelled like cut grass and money. Sprinklers hissed across lawns that did not have a single brown blade in them. Somewhere a leaf blower started, stopped, started again. He sat there. 7 feet of man folded into a truck cab, wearing a plain gray hoodie, jeans, sneakers with a worn left heel. No watch, no chain, no security. 4 championship rings sitting in a safe deposit box 4 states away. A net worth of over $400 million sitting in accounts he rarely looked at. One of the most recognized faces in the history of his sport, and not one person on that street knew it. He had called the brokerage 2 days earlier about the listing at the end of the lane, number 1140. He wanted to walk through it. He had said so on the phone, plainly, twice. The woman who came out of the model home office did not walk toward him. She stopped on the top step. She looked at the truck. She looked at the hoodie. She looked at the worn sneaker. "Can I help you with something?" she said. Not warm, flat. He said he had an appointment to see 1140. She smiled the way people smile when they have already decided. "Honey, that property starts at $6.4 million. We do qualified buyers only. Maybe somebody steered you wrong." And Malcolm Carter stood there on the sidewalk and said absolutely nothing. He did not argue. He did not reach for his wallet. He just looked past her shoulder down the length of the street, and his eyes moved across 3 things in slow succession, and he filed each one away without a word. The first was the street sign itself. Whitlock Lane. Black letters, white background, bolted to a green pole. He had read that name 1,000 times as a boy, sounding it out. And he read it again now, and held still for half a second longer than a stranger would. The second was a magnolia tree in the front yard of 1140 at the very end of the block. Enormous now. 40 feet of it, blooms just starting. But he was not looking at how big it was. He was looking at the base of it, at the lean of the trunk, the way it tilted very slightly south, as if it had spent its whole life reaching for something. The third came on the wind. Wind chimes. From the porch of the house at the end. Not the cheap aluminum kind. Blue glass. He heard the exact pitch of them. 3 notes, a low one, then 2 higher and close together, and his jaw moved once, and then it stopped. The woman on the step was still talking. He was not listening anymore. He looked at her name tag, white plastic, gold letters. He read the name. Then his eyes dropped, just barely, to the small oval gold locket she kept touching at her throat. She touched it the way nervous people touch the one thing that calms them. He noticed that too. He said nothing about any of it. He nodded once, got back in his truck, and drove away slow. And she watched the truck go with her arms crossed, certain she had handled it. She had not handled it. She had no idea what she had just done. Now here is the part that nobody on that street understood yet. Malcolm Carter had not come to Whitlock Lane to buy a house. He had come because of a promise he had been carrying for 26 years. A promise made at the foot of a hospital bed to a woman whose hands had cleaned 30 different houses on that exact street every weekday for 31 years. What the realtor had absolutely no idea about was one single fact. She thought she had turned away a man who could not afford the block. She had, in truth, turned away the only man alive who already knew every floorboard in that mansion, because he had waited on its back steps 1,000 afternoons as a boy, watching the door for someone to come out. And there was one more thing she did not know. A connection between her own life and his that neither of them had spoken out loud yet. A thread running back 40 years that was about to pull tight in front of the whole neighborhood. So stay with us for the whole video, because the ending of this one does not arrive the way you think it will. And the last thing he says to the woman who turned him away is not the thing you are expecting. Not even close. Malcolm Carter was born in a 2-room rental on the wrong side of a town that pretended Whitlock Lane did not exist. His mother worked 2 jobs and slept 4 hours and was gone before the rest of the world figured out who he would become. So the woman who raised him, the woman who was mother and father and weather all at once, was his grandmother. Her name was Odessa Carter. Everyone called her Mama Odessa, and she stood 5'1" in shoes, and there was more iron in her than in the railing of the bridge across the river. She cleaned houses. That was the work. Every weekday she rode the 11:40 bus across town, transferred once, and walked the last 6 blocks to a street where the lawns did not have a single brown blade. Whitlock Lane. She cleaned its kitchens and its marble and its silver. She scrubbed the floors of people who looked through her like she was a draft under a door. When Malcolm was small, before school age, she could not afford to leave him anywhere. So she brought him. He was not allowed inside the big houses. He waited on the back steps. He drew on the sidewalk with broken chalk. He played hopscotch by himself on a grid. He scratched into the concrete near the magnolia tree at number 1140, which back then was barely taller than he was. He had watched a gardener plant that tree. He had asked the gardener why it leaned, and the man said it was reaching for the morning sun, and that some things just lean toward where the light comes from their whole lives. And Malcolm had never once forgotten it. Mama Odessa had one rule. She said it so often it stopped being a rule and became the air in their apartment. She would walk those 6 blocks with her chin level, and she would take his small hand, and she would say it every single morning at the corner before they turned onto the street. Keep your head up in these houses, baby. We clean them. That don't make us beneath them. Don't you ever drop your eyes for anybody, especially here, especially on this street. She fed him on what was left over after the rent. She found him a basketball at a church sale for $1.50 and a hoop with no net bolted to a pole at the park. And she sat on a folding chair in the cold and watched him shoot until the streetlights came on. When he grew and grew and would not stop growing, and the coaches started calling the apartment, she ironed his one good shirt for every meeting and sat in the back of every gym and never once said the word money out loud, because she did not want him to learn to chase it. She wanted him to chase the work. She lived long enough to watch him drafted. She sat courtside in a dress she bought on layaway, and she did not cry where the cameras could see her. She lived long enough to see the first ring. She did not live to see the other 3. In the last week, in the hospital, when the machines were doing most of the breathing for her, she pulled his enormous hand to her cheek with both of her small ones, and she told him she had one more thing she wanted, and she made him lean all the way down to hear it. "There is a house on that street," she said, "number 1140. The lady who lived there was kind to me, was the only one who ever was. You go put your feet on that floor someday as a man who is welcome there. You walk in the front, not the back. You hold your head up. You do it for me." He promised. He held her hand until the breathing stopped. Then he went out and he became the most dominant force his sport had seen in a generation. 4 titles, $400 million, a face on cereal boxes, and the whole time, folded in the part of him no contract could touch, was a promise about a front door he had never once been allowed to use. It took him 26 years to be ready to keep it. That is why he came in the truck. He wanted to feel exactly the way he had felt as a boy on that sidewalk. And walk in anyway, as a man, head up. The woman on the step, the one who turned him away, her name tag read Diane Whitlock. She was 54 years old. She had not always been hard. Hardness is mostly just fear that has been left out too long. Diane had grown up 3 counties over, the daughter of a man who sold insurance and a mother who drank. And she had wanted exactly one thing out of life, which was to never be the person standing on the wrong side of a closed door again. She had clawed her way into real estate at 26. For a while it worked. For a while she was good. Then the market turned, the way it always turns. And it took the firm she had given 19 years to. And it took her savings. And 8 months before that March morning, it had started taking her own house. There was a notice taped to her own front door now. A real one. The bank wanted her out by the end of April. She had not told a soul at the office. She had taken the Whitlock Lane contract because the commission on 1140 alone would clear her debt and buy her 1 more year of standing. $6.4 million. 1 sale. She was 1 closing away from saving her entire life. And she lay awake every night doing the math the way frightened people do. The same numbers over and over, as if staring at them long enough would make them add up to safe. She had a developer breathing on her too. He had told her on the phone the day before that the listing was about serious money, and she needed to stop wasting showings on tire kickers and time wasters who came to gawk. He had used the word filter. He had said it twice. So when a man in a worn hoodie got out of a 15-year-old truck and asked to walk through a $6 million mansion, every terrified instinct in her stood up at once and answered before her better self could get to the door. She said the words before she even fully decided to say them. The second they left her mouth, some quiet part of her knew. She watched the truck pull away, and she touched the gold locket at her throat the way she always did when something felt wrong. And she told herself she had done her job. The thing she touched at her throat had belonged to her grandmother. She never took it off. 11 days later, at 9:40 on a Tuesday morning, 3 vehicles came down Whitlock Lane and parked in a neat row at the curb outside the model office. 2 black SUVs and, behind them, the same 15-year-old pickup truck with the cracked side mirror. Inside the office that morning were several people, and you should know each one because each one matters before this is over. There was Diane Whitlock at the front desk, who went very still when she saw the truck. There was Tyler Brooks, 22, the newest agent at the firm, 3 weeks in, still wearing the 1 suit he owned, still buying his lunch from the gas station to make the math work. Tyler was the one who had answered the phone the day Malcolm first called. Tyler was the one who had written the appointment down. Tyler had come in 11 days ago and asked Diane quietly what happened to the gentleman who was supposed to see 1140. And Diane had told him to mind the listings he could actually close. There was Ruth Alvarez, 71, a retired school teacher who lived in the modest Cape 2 streets over and who walked her little dog past the office every single morning and sometimes came in to sit because the coffee was free and her house was quiet since her husband passed. Ruth saw everything. Ruth said almost nothing. Ruth had been sitting by the window 11 days ago, and she had watched the whole thing on the step. And she had said exactly 1 sentence to Diane afterward, soft, not unkind. I'd have shown him the house. Then she had gone back to her coffee. And there was the developer, Garrett Voss, 48, in a suit that cost more than Tyler's car, who had driven out that morning specifically because he had gotten a call he did not understand from the listing trust about 1140. The doors of the lead SUV opened. 3 people got out in suits. Then the truck door opened, and Malcolm Carter unfolded out of it, 7 feet of him, in a clean white shirt this time, no tie. And he walked toward the office at the exact unhurried pace of a man who has waited 26 years and is not going to rush the last 40 feet of it. Diane stood up too fast. Her chair rolled back and hit the wall. Recognition came to her in stages, the way it comes to everyone. First the size, then the face. Then the cold drop in the stomach when the face attaches to a name everyone on earth knows. Something moved behind her eyes that was not quite shame and not quite panic, but lived uncomfortably close to both. "Mr. she started. "Mr. Carter, there was a misunderstanding. He raised one hand, gently, not to silence her, just to slow the room down. But before you hear what he said, you need to feel the full weight of what came before it, because this is the part where most people expect the rich man to crush the small woman who wronged him. That is the video you think you are watching. It is not this one." One of the suited men stepped forward and set a leather folder on Diane's desk and opened it. And inside were documents. And at the top of the first page were the words that made Garrett Voss, the developer, rise out of his chair. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The whole office held its breath. Malcolm did not look at the documents. He had read them already. He looked instead at the wall, at a framed photograph the firm hung of the street the day the development was finished. Decades ago, a black and white shot of Whitlock Lane, with the magnolia at 1140 still small. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was low and even and almost kind. "I'd like to walk through 1140 now," he said. "Front door. And I'd like Tyler to take me." Tyler's head came up like he had been called on in a class he was sure he was failing. The papers in the folder were a completed purchase, not of one house. Malcolm Carter had instructed his people 11 days earlier, the same afternoon he drove away, to quietly acquire every available property on Whitlock Lane and the listing trust that controlled the rest. By that Tuesday morning, he owned, outright, the entire street, including 1140, including the model office they were standing in, including the desk Diane was gripping with both hands. Garrett Voss understood first. His deal was gone. His leverage was gone. He gathered his coat and left without a word, and nobody watched him go. Diane understood in stages. He owned it, all of it. He owned the ground under her feet and the listing that was supposed to save her and her job, and the chair she had knocked into the wall. She had turned this man away from a sidewalk 11 days ago. And now, he owned the sidewalk. She did the only thing left to do. She started, very quietly, to fall apart, one breath at a time, behind a hand pressed to her mouth. And here is where the two stories you have been watching turn out to be one story. Malcolm walked the length of Whitlock Lane to number 1140 with Tyler beside him, and he walked in the front door for the first time in his life, ducking his head under the frame. And he stood in the great empty entry hall with the morning light coming through the tall windows. And he turned in a slow circle and put his hand flat against the wall, and something in his chest let go that had been held for 26 years. Then he turned to Diane, who had followed at a distance because she did not know what else to do with herself, and he asked her one question. "That locket you wear," he said, "where'd it come from?" She blinked. Her hand went to her throat on instinct. "It was my grandmother's," she said. Eleanor Whitlock. The street's named for her family. She lived here, in this house, before I was born." Malcolm nodded slowly, like a man hearing the last note of a song he had known his whole life. "Open it," he said. She did, with shaking hands. Inside the oval was a photograph cracked with age. A woman with kind eyes, gray hair, standing on the porch of this very house. And beside her, smaller, a black woman in a housekeeper's dress. The two of them laughing at something out of frame, the way only people who actually like each other laugh. "That's my grandmother," Diane whispered. "I never knew who the other woman was. She kept this picture on the mantel her whole life. She used to say it was of her dearest friend." "Her name was Odessa Carter," Malcolm said. "She cleaned this house for 31 years. And your grandmother, Eleanor, was the only person on this entire street who ever treated her like a human being. She gave her a Christmas envelope every year. She sat at her own kitchen table with her when nobody was watching. She hung those blue glass chimes on this porch as a gift to my grandmother, because she knew Odessa loved the sound of them. They're still out there. I heard them 11 days ago from the curb. That's how I knew I had the right house." The whole room was silent. "I didn't buy this street to get back at you, Miss Whitlock," he said. "I bought it 11 days ago, before I knew your name. Because I made a promise to a dying woman that I would put my feet on this floor as a man who was welcome here. I didn't know until you opened that locket that the granddaughter of the one kind woman in my grandmother's whole working life was the same person who turned me away on the sidewalk. Your grandmother gave mine her dignity. I'm not going to be the man who takes yours." He reached into his jacket and set a single card on the windowsill beside her. Not a check. A card. "My foundation is opening a housing office on this street," he said, "helping families that clean these houses afford to live in this town. It needs someone who knows real estate and knows what it costs to almost lose everything. I'd like you to run it. The salary's on the back, and the house you're about to lose to the bank. The notice on your door. That debt was bought and cleared this morning. It's yours, free and clear. Consider it 40 years late, from Odessa to Eleanor's family." Diane Whitlock did not say anything for a long time. She just held the open locket in one hand and the card in the other, and cried in the empty entry hall of a house her grandmother had once loved. Then Malcolm turned to Tyler, 22 years old, still in his one suit. "You wrote my appointment down," he said. "You asked what happened to me when nobody told you to. You did the right thing when it cost you something. The office on this street is going to need agents with a conscience. You're the first one I'm hiring, and the gas station lunches stop today." And Ruth Alvarez, 71, the silent witness, the retired teacher who had said 11 words 11 days ago, stood up by the window and put her coffee down. And for the first time in years, she had nothing to say, because the thing she had quietly wished into that room had come true in front of her. Malcolm walked back out onto the porch of 1140. The blue glass chimes moved in the wind. 3 notes, a low one, then 2 higher and close together, the exact ones from his childhood. He stood under them with his eyes closed, this enormous man. And his grandmother had been right about everything. Then he opened his eyes and looked up at the magnolia tree, the one that had been barely taller than him 50 years ago and was 40 feet of bloom now, still leaning slightly south, still reaching its whole life toward where the light came from. So when you watch this one again, watch the start. Watch how he stops at the street sign before anyone says a word. Watch the magnolia. Listen for the chimes. He was solving it before he ever got out of the truck. A waitress could have learned this lesson, and a teacher, and a young man 3 weeks into a job he was scared to lose. A woman who turned a man away because she was one closing from drowning and was shown grace instead of a reckoning. A grandmother who cleaned floors for 31 years and was told every morning to keep her head up. And a granddaughter who kept a stranger's photograph on her mantel her whole life without knowing it was the woman who made her own family kind. He kept his head up. On that street. Especially on that street. Just like she told him to. Head up, Mama. We own it now. He never dropped his eyes for anybody. And neither should you. So do me a favor before you go. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And tell us the one person who taught you to keep your head up, no matter the room you walked into. If Mama Odessa's promise put something in your chest, hit that like button. Not for us, for her, and for every woman who ever cleaned a house she was never welcomed into. Subscribe and join this family, because we tell these stories for the people the world looks through, and there are more of them coming. There's another one waiting for you right on your screen right now, and it might be the one you needed most. Go on. We'll see you there. We'll see you